Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we are going to be talking with singer, songwriter, musician Ray Davis about consciousness and music. Very, very excited about this topic. So before we get started, Michael has some announcements.
Hi, everyone, and here we are coming to the end of November already, end of our first year. We're really excited. We did 50 shows this past year, so we feel good about that. We hardly missed a week, and we hope we're not going to miss too much time this coming year. We're going to have a lot of great guests on. It's going to be fun. Just to give you guys a quick peek at what's ahead of us, we've got the cosmic weather for December coming up next week, so we'll look at the astrology that's happening in December and what that might all mean. And then coming up as our guest in December, our first Tuesday, will be the return of Mystic Mitten Paranormal from Detroit. And they're going to talk to us about what they've been up to in Michigan, chasing ghosts and all their latest exploits and adventures. And that'll be a lot of fun. The following week, we have our good friend Humberto Braga back. He started a website for networking psychics and mediums and healers and all kinds of cool people. And he's going to talk about that project and how he's looking at that to make the world a better place. And then our last guest for December is going to be our good friend David Ullman, who has just released his book, Ghosts of Cielo Drive. And he's the friend of ours that lives next to where the Manson family did in Sharon Tate and all those people up in Benedict Canyon. And so he's going to talk about all the things that go bump in the night in his house. And it's a very famous haunted property that he lives on. And we've been there many, many times. And hopefully maybe somewhere in the new year, we might even do a remote show from there. You never know. We've thought about it. So we'll see if we have the courage to do that. So thanks for all the support. And please subscribe. It makes us feel good to get new subscribers, obviously, and we're really happy that you guys are enjoying the show. Please comment. Our live chat will be up. If you have comments for Ray or questions, then let us know and we'll pass them on. And you can get all the information on our show on our website, which is sixthsensesociety.com, and it's SIXTH. It's spelled out, so sixthsensesociety.com. So go there and find out all our information and check our Instagram, all that cool stuff. And with that, I'm going to send it back to Krista. And I am also really excited about this show because music fascinates me, as we know, and Krista as well. And consciousness fascinates me, so it should be a good topic. So take it away, guys.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So welcome, Ray. We're very happy to have you here. And I'm very impressed by your talent. Not only are you a singer-songwriter, but you play the trumpet, the piano, guitar. You also are very interesting and a deep thinker from the little bit of time I've spent with you talking. But I did listen to some of your music on your website. Oh, cool. And I've heard you here at the lodge, and I was already impressed, but now I'm really impressed. Oh. So welcome.
Oh, wonderful.
I can see you've been immersed in music for a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So how did you start your journey with music?
I got born. Came out of mama. I mean, really, that's the truth, because my mother is a wonderful musician, mostly a church musician. Mm-hmm. She plays piano and organ and sings, and there was always music in the house. I'm one of 7 kids.
Wow.
The oldest boy, which is important because boys rule. So it's important to note that I'm the oldest boy. There were 4 boys, 3 girls, and everybody participated in music to some extent. I probably took it further than anybody else, other than my oldest sister, who was also a great pianist, choir director. She writes a bit and sings.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so cool. I always liked musical families.
Oh, yeah, it was fun.
It just seems so wholesome on a lot of levels. It really does.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. Because as we'll talk about, music sets a mood in a sense, and it's not just a fleeting mood. It's something you can bank on, something you can count on. And the mood established in our household early on by my mother, just practicing what she needed to practice a piece for the next Saturday. We were Seventh-day Adventists, so our church met on Saturday. Whether it was for that or for another church she was playing for, working with a soloist, someone coming over. We were infused with spiritual music, specifically Christian music.
Right.
And that made a big difference in the way that we behaved in the house and how we worked with each other. I mean, we didn't walk around on eggshells or pious.
Right.
But, there were certain things that happened to other families that just wouldn't happen in our household.
My experience was, I think I talked to you before the show, is my Hungarian grandmother was a concert pianist and trained to be a concert pianist. And so she deeply influenced me in the piano, even though she never encouraged me to make a living as a pianist. Yeah. But I loved her playing, and I definitely think probably because of her, I was interested and still am mostly interested in classical piano, like playing it myself. Mm-hmm. And when I came back to just listening to classical music, like at night, I go to sleep, I always have the classical music on. And my grandmother was like that. The other thing that was kind of unique about her is she hated recordings.
Really?
Yeah, she always felt music, and she had a point. She always felt like music had to be experienced in person.
Yes.
And even though she had her secret Horowitz piano recording in her room.
Who didn't?
She would.
You gotta have Horowitz.
Exactly. And she would go to a lot of concerts, and she would take me sometimes. And she was also really very big on going up to the artist during the breaks. And I remember there was this one, he was, I forget who he was. He was a African-American pianist that was amazing, but I forget, I was very young, and he was sort of on the side, like just in between on an intermission. And so my grandma's like, I'm going to go up to him. She's a little tiny Hungarian woman. He's like, Grandma, he's like too important, She says, no, you must always go thank the artist. And she did, and he was so gracious. And now I understand that, because a lot of times the artists don't get directly thanked. But she always thought that was part of the manners. You must go and talk to them and thank them. And so she definitely taught me some things about music appreciation, I think, which I think any of us can benefit from too. Even if you don't want to necessarily play music, though, personally, again, because my grandmother said in Hungary, everyone played an instrument, like it was just not a big thing.
Yeah.
And I guess, that was like almost like a sport. And so she didn't quite understand sometimes the overemphasis on, I play an instrument, instead of it being just part of your life. And yes, maybe some people become masters at it. And I feel that way about singing. Like, I feel like we should all sing. What do you think about that?
I agree on both fronts. Just quickly on the singing bit, I think it is important for every person to sing and sing from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Most people who I talk to who say that they can't sing, what they mean by that is that they can't, or they have an underdeveloped ability for pitch matching. So the tone that they hear outside of themselves, they are not able to accurately match from within. In other words, the voice singing. Which often sounds like monotoning, or they kind of stick around the same pitch no matter whether the melody goes up or down. And that is usually indicative of someone who either didn't or was not encouraged to sing as a child and sing in a community. So a children's choir, singing in church or other kind of community gatherings, could be a club, could be anything like that. But communal singing early on, regularly, that because it connects us in a way, like, in a sense, like food, like shelter connects us. Necessary experiences, necessary for every human, for the full health and wholeness of a human. So I completely agree with the singing part. Most people will not get to the point of becoming great singers in the sense of, I'm a soloist. So what? Sing. It's for the person singing that we sing, not for the audience. That's a secondary benefit.
Don't you think that's why people love sing-alongs?
Yeah.
that they have a chance to just do it and no one's going to judge them or
Yeah.
make fun of them. And you know, speaking of consciousness and music, the topic, was this show in Britain, and I think it was called The Choir. And they
yeah.
would bring.
I never saw it, but-
oh my
but yeah, I
God, it
remember
was
it.
so moving. They would bring together communities that often had conflicts, and they were using a choir to bridge differences, and it was working. And so it seems like it can literally change consciousness if we sing together. Like different, I forget some of the examples, but they were people that really didn't get along, or people that were maybe fringe people, and I was so impressed by the idea. I think it was only 1 or 2 seasons. I don't know what happened to the show, but
I should go back and look at that. That's really remarkable.
it was remarkable. It was very moving and inspiring, and I thought, boy, LA, we need more of that. You know, to bridge we have so many different cultures and different kinds of people, which in one way is great, but the consciousness of LA is lacking a little right now. You know, I think personally, having been in Venice, you've been here your whole life, right?
Yeah.
But just the 20 years, I just feel like it's not changing and growing enough, you know, for such a big, important city.
Yeah. I think we're getting more marginalized. Not marginalized, but siloed is really what I would like to think. You know, LA is huge. That is the territory. It's wide open and comprises a lot of smaller communities, and people will identify with those communities, or identify with a particular scene, whether it's art or music or sports or that kind of thing. But I agree with you in that there isn't a lot that brings us together across those lines. Sports can do that from time to time.
Yes.
But I have a very good friend. She sings with me in our band, and we've worked together many, many times, who every Tuesday night when I'm here with Lodge, every Tuesday night, she's leading a community choral kind of thing. She just gathers, people come, not paying anything, sit in a big circle, and they sing songs. All kinds of songs, all kinds of folk songs. Some take some modern pop songs, traditional songs. Some of them spiritual, some of them, but just music. They just sing together. She'll teach them parts. She'll teach them counterpoint.
Wow,
it's wonderful.
Where does she do this?
She does it in Leimert Park, Park in Inglewood.
Wow.
Yeah, and she is actually part of. At least here in North America, between Canada and U.S., there is a growing community choir kind of movement. People who are interested in doing it, and a lot of it stems from folks who want to preserve folk music.
Okay.
Yeah, and keep that going. It's interesting. From time to time, I'll come across somebody in an audience who doesn't recognize a particular song that we might do or something, and it's interesting to me how quickly music can fall into an oldies category. And so the current generation or the one just preceding it, they're not they're unaware of it. A lot of the music that we might have heard growing up, we heard on television, variety shows and that type of thing. And, you don't have that experience today. Even television shows generally don't have theme songs, which is a big change.
Right.
So there's less, I know I'm bringing up trivial, mundane little things, but the music has always functioned as a sort of cultural touchstone for us. Now, that was lovely. I think it's E flat. E. Okay. So where was I? Touchstones. Yeah.
Touchstones.
So in terms of consciousness, this has always been held up by the churches, and specifically Christian churches. You're going to find more communal singing than you would say in a Jewish synagogue,
right?
Where they're led by the cantor. There's beautiful music there. But, with less participation in traditional Christian churches, there's a gap there. So I agree with you. I think that there is need for, singing what would be thought of as patriotic songs. You don't hear much of that anymore.
That's true.
There just aren't occasions for it. So it's nice to see a movement where people are trying to at least bring people together to sing something that they can agree on.
That's interesting. And that let's talk about how the dissemination of music can be positively used in affecting consciousness and negatively used to manipulate
Excellent.
consciousness.
Yeah.
So let's start with the positive view of how we can lift people up. That's an example of what you were saying. I hadn't really thought about that the people not going to church as much and being is really affecting music. And then the theme songs, you're right, when I thought about
Little
it.
things.
So I guess you just have to find new ways like that the world around is doing with the music. And I guess there are some shows, I have to admit, like we watch America's Got Talent, and I've seen some unusual groups like from Africa, and they are pretty good at displaying the different kinds of musical talents through the world. And I mean, I've learned about things I never would have seen, honestly, because it's hard to find out, where do I listen to music now too, because there's different ways you can listen. I can download a song, whereas when I was growing up, it was vinyl records and the radio. I mean, it wasn't a lot of different things when you think about it. And that can be a little overwhelming. Like, how do I choose my music, or are we being manipulated sometimes by the choices that come through to us?
Oh, man. How much time do we have to talk today? There's so many good things here. Okay, I want to get to this dissemination thing, and first thing that came to mind was, "We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday." Yeah, that was a huge part of the civil rights movement here in the U.S. Huge part of it. And it was one thing that united every person who was interested in seeing the vision that came through Martin Luther King Jr. Show up in actual society. It united people. And all of the songs that were sung on the, for instance, in the March, Selma, and the march in Washington, D.C., the songs that were sung at these events, and innumerable local events, they united people in spirit. How is it able to do it? How is it able to do it? Music has an effect on us. Easy enough to see. I remember when I was going to church, Seventh Adventist Church, I remember one Saturday, before the service started, and someone's toddler, about maybe a year and a half old, had made way up to the front where the organist and pianists were playing, and just started moving. You could see the diapered bottom bouncing up and down. Just moving. Now this was interesting to me because this was a while ago, a number of years ago. Very briefly, the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, a wonderful Protestant denomination at the time, it's not as much today, but at the time had admonitions about what type of music was proper. I mean, it's still in existence within the church, but it was much more narrowly defined back then. And so music, and so the response to music also, music couldn't be too spicy, too worldly was the word used. And also dancing. I didn't grow up dancing. None of us grew up dancing. None of us danced. And so to see this little toddler walking on up there and just start, little booty bopping around was remarkable. And it hit me at the time. I realized something. It's like, the response to that, what's happening in that child right now, was not taught.
It's true.
But it can be taught out. It was not taught in, it can be taught out. That, it was a little girl. She showed up with that. All children show up with a natural response to rhythm, to pitch, a tempo, timbre, these elements of music. Music moves us involuntarily.
That's true. You find sometimes your foot starts tapping, you didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if you don't like the person performing, if you give yourself enough time, you're going to feel a physical response to what's coming through. You know, your mental idea about them can color it a bit. But if it's bumping, it's bumping. If it's soothing, it's soothing. If it thrills you, it thrills you. So in other words, like archetypal images that we would find on tarot cards. Music is an archetype. Tone is an archetype, and specific combinations of tones, rhythmic patterns, harmonic sequences. These things carry narrative meaning to us. You know, meaning that we collectively give it, but meaning nonetheless. So it makes perfect sense that one could create music with the intention to anger, or the intention to inspire, the intention to comfort, or the intention to insult. These things are absolutely. I mean, any dance band will tell you, my choice in songs, I want to get them up on the floor. I want to get them moving. That's the whole purpose why I'm choosing this particular song and this particular beat. If I'm a creator, a composer, one of the things I want to know is, what's the intention? Right. You know, who's the audience and what do we want to do? How do we want to affect them? A lot of times songwriters have exactly that kind of conversation. Not always, but many times.
And it's interesting too. So it really comes down to the individual in terms of how they affect the culture and consciousness, such as like in the Nazis using music, patriotic music, and the classical musicians to manipulate and also deliberately program people. I found this site. It's this whole site, a blog called Music and the Holocaust. And I guess there's more research going into the whole music side of the Holocaust. And it's quite detailed. I mean, I learned a few things I didn't even know about, but I had no idea it was just so deliberate, the way they handled music, and they had this how did they call it? There was a festival that the Degenerate Music Exhibition of 1938 attacked jazz and Jewish music as degenerate.
Yes.
So they were trying to define what degenerate was, and they had a hard time because there were some Jewish composers they liked. And so they were trying to, and of course, Germany does have some great composers in its history.
Fabulous.
So they do have that going for them, kind of. But what's really horrible I learned was that on this site, it's called, like I said, it's called Music and the Holocaust, a blog. And they used music as torture. They would have musicians, inmates, play music while others were being beaten, or they were outside the gas chamber. Yeah. They even used it during public hangings and executions, and when over loudspeakers during mass shootings. Talk about abuse of music, and good music. So it's all, music is kind of largely innocent. We'll talk about there are some sounds that destroy, but we're the ones causing the problems with music, largely speaking.
Yeah, and it follows everything else with the overall human experience on the planet. That is by methods we can refer to as scientific. We observe and experiment and try, use things. We make use of our discoveries. And to discover music, and to discover music means more than just discovering the fact that I can sing, or I can extend the sound and create pitch, and aside from that, deciding that I can use it, how I use it is the important thing here. Yes, it makes sense that we can destroy as well as create musically. You're talking about the Nazis. One of the things that I found interesting about that was Hitler's apparent love of Wagner. And what was I just hearing? A bit of, not Demeistersing, but piece I just heard on the radio. But you listen to Wagner's music, and it makes sense. You listen to Wagner, a lot of times you want to sit up straight. It can be very inspiring, and there are martial elements in some of his compositions, and so I can see why he would want to use that. But here's the man, I'm still reeling from what you talked about there, man. To use beautiful music while people are being tortured.
Yeah, that was new. I didn't know they did that.
I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know they did that. And they would make the Jewish people play.
Of course. Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, they had some twisted.
So what they're doing
minds.
is they're taking the natural narrative that we collectively will create around certain progressions and pitch combinations and timbre combinations. I'm thinking right now that beautiful combination of flute clarinet. When the flutes and clarinets are playing either in unison or at the octave, it's a gorgeous sound to me. It reminds me of what's the word? Azure blue with a shine over the top of it. I don't know why, but it creates a kind of sparkle in the midst of a piece. If you take that combination and you pair it with first and second violins even, playing a line similar, that line it's going to shimmer. But to take that kind of combination, for instance, and it doesn't matter, it could be trumpets and oboes, but combinations of instruments and as I said, progressions that we have collectively created narratives around and distort it. To use something that's intended to be comforting, or use something that's intended to raise one's sights to the heavens while they're being massacred.
Yeah,
That's true. That's evil.
that is truly evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, just when you think you've heard the lowest of, with the Nazis, and I'm sure there's other periods that did things like that as well. But and then there is the obvious way. I don't know if this is really music though. Though we were talking about amplification. If it's really amplified, you were talking about the physical pressure.
Oh yeah.
Against the body, and some people lose their hearing because of the over amplification.
Yeah.
Which does kind of puzzle me a little bit. I've never quite understood why a lot of musicians will overly amplify things when it's not necessary for hearing, because I really feel it in my body, and
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't mind at a big concert because, it dissipates.
Yeah.
And you can sit away from it.
Yeah.
But it must be some form of pleasure for them, I've decided.
All right. Well, I have a couple small theories on that one. Number one, when I'm on the bandstand, I really don't want it to be too loud. I've just adjusted that way. But there was a time, you want it the louder the better. And I think sometimes it's also a male thing. Mm-hmm. I really do think that guys create situations just to test the body's limits. It from punching each other, hit me harder. Okay, well, what sense does that make? All kinds of things. But yeah, I think there's some of that. But there's a wonderful rush of feeling when it's all around you and within you. You got the bass, you got the drums, you got guitars are playing, keys. It's great. It's a great feeling. But yeah, it does tear up your hearing.
Yeah, it does.
You gotta
and probably everyone's wired differently. Like, I'm wired to feel very sensitively. I've always been that way. It has nothing to do with anything. Like, just that's who I am. Mm-hmm. I used to not even be able to go to concerts.
Oh.
And my mother was like that. So I think it's genetic. It's like my nervous system. Everyone's systems are different.
Yeah.
And I just figured that's not a judgment. Someone feels things differently than others. Some people feel some things very subtly. Sometimes people smell things that other people don't. We're like animals that way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's probably part of it as well, because I can pick up on very subtle sounds and feelings very easily, like birds do.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I wanted to talk about. We think about music and consciousness being human, but one of the interesting things I find is how many creatures where music is their way of life. Now, birds are the obvious. And I'm always fascinated by those little birds hidden in the trees at night, and they all get together and they're singing away. And we want to know, what are they singing about? Like, it's so obvious, important, and I just wish I could understand it,
I know.
And then you have the whales communicating with music, and they change their songs. And to me, that's part of consciousness, that we're not the only ones that use music.
That is a brilliant observation, I think. It is most certainly an aspect of consciousness. Music, like speech, is a type of expression. Yeah. You were talking about animals. First thing that came to my mind was wolves and dogs. I have a beautiful, one of two beautiful stepdaughters who lives in Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah. She and her husband have two dogs. And those dogs like to sing. They get together. She'll start singing something with an ukulele. She's plays uk, and they'll just start. If you start one of them, it's just a whole family singing. And just howling.
That's amazing.
It's communication. It is. When dogs speak, it's more the bark. What's with the howling? Mm-hmm. What is that all about? Why do wolves howl at the moon? I was thinking about also, here's something to consider. If our first musical instrument was the voice, was a perfect human voice, what is the difference between speaking and singing?
That's a good question.
One would say that singing is elongated speech. That's one way we could say it. It's organized, elongated speech. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because but there is pitch with every word that we say. There is pitch with every word that we say. As we speak, we establish rhythm. Mm-hmm. Our individual voices express timbre, or the characteristics, the specific characteristics of sound, that which helps one distinguish the difference between a viola and a banjo. Mm-hmm. That's timbre. Pace or tempo is an aspect of it, again, as something to do with rhythm. All of the elements of music are there in our speech, but we don't recognize it that way. Yet, our speech can have, obviously has a profound effect on us mentally, but it, like music, has a subconscious effect on us as well. So it's possible to have a conversation with someone and they're saying very pleasant things, but I'm getting the distinct impression that this person does not wish me well.
Yes.
There's music. There are elements of music in our speech as well. So I would say that consciousness always results in music. In the Sefer Yetzirah, it suggests that the cosmos was created with sound vibration, through the utterance, the expression of tones. Mm-hmm. And specifically in that case, I believe is the Aleph Bet. The Aleph, Bet, that kind of thing. Bet. And a part of my personal spiritual practice, and this is reflected in all spiritual communities, I chant and intone. Mm-hmm. I have certain prayers that I will intone musically, tones, pitch. There are pitch correspondences with all of the Aleph Bet, everything in Torah as well. So, I shouldn't say everything, but the 22 major arcana, yes. So, where consciousness is, there is music. There is music.
I thought about, I never thought about the difference between, words and music. And some people must know that. Maybe that's why their voices are so naturally resonant.
Yes.
Or like Morgan Freeman, you just like listening to his voice. Right. And I don't remember the podcast I was listening to, but it was about mantras and music. And he was saying how he can tell a lot by how someone speaks. And I didn't finish the podcast, but he can tell things about, what's missing in the person, like their wounds. And certainly you can kind of hear when people are cut off. You can tell when their speech is really cut off from their, they're like talking up here,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not some kind of genetic thing where, someone was born that way. But one of the things I feel from when I did take some professional singing lessons with the most amazing, beautiful teacher, that I've had some great music teachers, and I think that's why I went to them, because they taught me about life, actually.
Yeah.
All of my music teachers gave me lessons of life.
Yay.
And she was she was one of these people that was really looking to have the experience of a beautiful sound. I mean, she started off with just wanting to sing, she said, so she kind of went into the opera world, but she made me very aware of how to produce sound differently from, where you start and, exercises that they give you. And when you produce sound from different parts of your body, I feel it has a healing effect on the body. So that depending on that's why, I guess it's better for your vocals too to start, lower on. But it also, toning's like that too. Have you ever done toning where you just make sounds until the group starts sounding really good together,
Yes.
but you're just making sounds and you start to feel really good and soothed. And I don't know, perhaps words could do that, but we don't usually use them that way. Whereas music just lends itself to doing that.
Yeah.
That healing, soothing, like laughter, is like that too, where it's just massaging parts of your organs. And it is always amazing. What I find amazing is when I'm watching like America's Got Talent, this little bitty person gets up there with this huge sound. I mean, I still can't get over it. And no one gets over it. Everyone's always like this. Doesn't matter how many times you see it. I said, how did that voice come out of that 8-year-old? It's like,
I don't know, but some folks
not all of them are like that.
They're just born with it though.
They are.
Born
It's
with
like
the capacity. I'll give you another example, but from a different age range. Tony Bennett. Tony Bennett to me is a marvel of nature. The guy ever since the beginning of his career, I've got a puppet on a string. This huge voice, but not just big like Pavarotti. It's a cutting voice as well. So he was able to cut through big bands. I mean, the guy was, and to this day, he's well in his 90s, right? He's still going.
oh, wow.
I mean, the voice is not exactly as great as it was, but you still hear that fire in his tone, and he's still got that big resonance. That's just Tony Bennett.
Right.
Frank couldn't sing quite like that.
Yeah, it is interesting. I don't know if it's, some people say it's a gift or it's genetics or who knows what it is. But we all recognize it when we hear it.
Freddie Mercury.
Yes. Yeah.
And he credited the odd shape of his jaw or whatever with resonance. Yeah, I can't imagine that didn't help hurt. But I want to address something you said earlier, Krista, about music teachers and voice teachers and teaching to sing from different parts of the body. Here's a funny thing about music teaching. And, I might be starting some stuff up here. Or not music teaching, but voice teaching in particular. I think that teaching voice is the hardest, is most difficult. The most difficult instrument to teach is voice. With every other instrument, whether it's a stringed instrument, woodwind, percussion, there are places that one places one's hands or one holds the mouth. You have to handle the instrument. How do you do that with your voice?
That's true. It's inside.
So what exactly? So what we try to do in teaching voice is to teach a person to become sensitive to their own feedback that's coming through the body. I'm going to give you feedback from out here and tell you here's how this is sounding. What our intention is to sound this way. Try feeling it from here. Because technically, there's only one place where the voice, where the air and the vibrations happen. That's right here in the vocal cords. So there's nothing that's really happening here. But there is, in terms of the way that I feel. Whether I'm more relaxed and open,
right,
in the chamber, the lower chamber of the body that's divided, below the diaphragm, where I'm drawing in air, or whether I'm feeling really tense here in the musculature around the vocal cords, or anywhere else in the body. So a lot of it is helping a person to become physically sensitive to their own process of singing so that they can relax. This is necessary because, again, with the fewer impediments to a person freely receiving the product, music, the better. I like what your grandmother had, her point of view about recorded music. I've thought about this quite a bit. Recorded music is a recent phenomenon in terms of human history. for most of our history, we have not had recorded music. In order to experience music, you had to experience it in the presence of the music maker. And I think, in a sense, we're kind of getting back to that. The industry has changed so much that people don't own music as much anymore. They simply access it. I don't know about the majority of people, but based on what I can see from folks showing up at shows and big shows, that not owning music is not enough to close the loop. People still seek the personal experience of music. And that's where I think it has its most power and where it's really intended to be. I do love recorded music. There's stuff that I get to listen to.
Well, there's definitely, it's important because that's how we keep knowing about what was made, and we can also go back and learn from it.
Yeah.
But to be honest, like we went to The Who recently, and
Yeah.
I knew a lot more of their music than I thought, but I never knew a lot of the name songs. I'm not very, when they play on the radio, you don't always, like growing up, you don't remember the song names.
Right.
So Michael said, well, this is their song and this is their song. I said, oh, I know that one really well. So, but I wasn't sure how I would be at the concert because, it's pretty loud and everything. And to be honest, I'm not usually a huge fan of the electric guitar. I mean, I appreciate it.
Wait a minute.
But
allow me to gasp, would you?
I know. I like the acoustic. It's just, but when I saw Peter, they showed him like up close, and I saw him what he did, and being there, I had a whole different experience, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I was just wowed more by him than I thought I would be.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, how did he do that? And it just the sound, but I think it was that being in his presence. It's not just the music. It's like a spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
You want to be at least once in their presence because all these things are exchanged in consciousness. There's all these ways we exchange energy. And you can't do that in a recording. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care. It is different.
It's different.
It's different. I value recordings for different reasons. But I remember every concert I've ever been to that moved me. I can go back into the experience. I can remember the feeling of it. I can't say that even about the records I love. I mean, I don't remember, not the visceral, maybe it's because it's shared in a collective way in big concerts and you remember that. But there's something so special about it. And it does, for me, it raises my consciousness on some level, whatever that consciousness is. Maybe it's just, I'm going to appreciate, like in this case, I learned to appreciate something that I didn't appreciate before. I'm more open to, in a sense, and can see why people really value the playing of someone like him.
Yeah.
So it's opening my mind to a different kind of person. And that's part of consciousness. It isn't all like woo-woo, experience God. It's just being open and broadening our perspectives, consciousness.
Yes. Becoming aware of something that we weren't aware of before in a way that enriches us personally. Yeah. I was thinking about recorded music. What is its, what's a great function? I think a great purpose of recorded music is almost like meditation or as a meditative way. When I'm enjoying recorded music, most of the time I'm by myself. So I can sink into and it's always going to be exactly the same every time I hear it. Only variation maybe, what I'm playing it on and how it presents music. But I have the opportunity to sink into that and have a personal experience with what seems to be communicated through the music. And I really do believe that specific pitches, combinations of pitches, harmonic sequences can be used because of the collective narrative we've created around it, can be used effectively for good purposes and obviously effectively for negative or destructive purposes. And one of the things I can be very grateful for is my background in, as a church kid. I was a church kid. One of the things about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, especially at the time I was growing up, rich music. Narrowly defined, yes, but boy, the quality that we got, just from our local church, our local congregation in Compton. Then, add to that extended churches throughout the region, throughout the country. Wonderful. There was a lot of music education, a lot of opportunities to learn and to perform both within the church and within schools because they run the school system as well. And because we heard a lot of classical music, my mother insisted that we have a lot of classical music. I would spend hours with phonographs, putting this on that one, on that, all kinds of stuff. Loved it, loved it, loved it. We would listen to classical music. We'd listen to a lot of spirituals, a lot of older style gospel music, not more the modern stuff, but not a little bit of older style gospel music. And we didn't listen to a lot of pop. A lot of rock did not belong in our house. R&B did not belong in our house. Soul and funk, couldn't have it. We have to sneak outside to find it. But the structure, especially of classical music, was very instructive, very helpful. I'm thoroughly bathed in Western harmony, which is so important because that's the basis of our shared narrative here in the West.
Right.
I speak to that too because of our spiritual inheritance here in the West. We have a wonderful path in the West, communicated and preserved, but communicated mouth to ear. And this again goes back to the idea of hearing music live as opposed to relying just on recordings. When you're live, just like sitting there with your guru or your spiritual teacher,
right,
you're able to receive it firsthand, mouth in a modern version, sort of mouth to ear. Now you're going to be surrounded by a group of maybe 10,000 people or whatever it is, but still, you're able to make that connection with the giver of the music and the original intention of the music. If they're careful enough to craft it that way, but otherwise, you're that live experience I think is more important than anything else.
Yeah, and there's so much free live things here in LA if you think about it.
That's true.
Beyond Baroque will often have things. There was a program I went to, and there was not that many people there, but it was a fantastic program. Like it was, the singers were great, the songs, and I was so glad I went out. I was like, I should do this more. I mean, it doesn't really, you don't want to go out. It's cold or whatever it is. It was in the winter when I was, and it wasn't that far away. But I was so glad I did, and I think people, everything swings the pendulum. And like you said, I think that there's more of that sense of community and music, I think, coming back a lot. And there's room for everything,
Yeah.
So
True.
I did want to also mention, I think Michael wanted to talk about the demonic chord.
Diablos in
We
musica.
definitely are fascinated by that because I tend to listen to a lot of metal music. And
Yeah.
of course, the diminished fifth, for centuries apparently, was banned by the church. They wouldn't allow composers to use it because it caused this sort of resonance that caused angst in people, and they thought it would actually unleash the forces of hell if you used it in a composition. So I believe at one point they even executed people for using it, composers, if they found them using it. So it's quite an interesting thing. So, and I want to make one other quick comment before we move on too, just 'cause I was listening to you guys talk about recording. And I was speaking with a friend about music recently, and he informed me that a lot of people recording music are going back to analog tape again, that they're getting away from digital, that they feel that there's a warmth or a presence or harmonics to recording on tape that doesn't exist. And I also remember an interview that was done with Jack White. And he was one of the guys that really brought back the LP. He was insistent that they start recording on vinyl again and set up a studio in Nashville to record on vinyl. And he was in a limousine, and he was talking to Dan Rather, or whoever was interviewing him. And he said, I can download music on, I can download a film and watch it on my iPad. He said, but when you pass by a theater, he said, that's where you're supposed to be watching a film, not on your iPad. And he said, it's the same with music. He said, you can download it digitally, but you're supposed to be listening to it on vinyl.
That's right. Tower speakers, baby. Come on.
Yeah. I thought that was really cool. But as I said, the diminished fifth is definitely a fascination of mine. So I'll let you guys talk a little about that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy that you brought that up. The Diablos in musica, the devil in music. So it takes a bit of knowing of Western harmony, but the Diablos in musica is a wild child. It's a wild card, so to speak. All right, so in our Western system of harmony, it's the initial pitches, there are only 11 distinct pitches. They say 12, but that would be repeating the first one. So it's actually 11 distinct pitches. The distance between each pitch we now call a half tone or half step or semitone. What did they call it in England? I forget what they all call the semiquavy wave. Blah, blah, anyway, but and that's rhythm. I'm sorry. It's not pitch. Pitch is fine. So semitone or halftone. So diablos in musica, an interval is the measured distance between two tones. So I'm going to use my hands to mark. So this is I'm going to say this is C, the pitch known as C. Right. So to get to the diminished fifth or augmented fourth, we're going to go 4 letter names above C's. C, what's next after C? D, E, F. So it is a C to an F in this case. It could start on any pitch. I'm just using this as an example. C to F. The Diablos in Musica must involve a C and an F, however they're called. This could be C, C sharp, C flat, F, F sharp, F flat. But some combination of the two is going to result in it. Now, from C to F. But you also have to come from C to C sharp, one half step. C sharp to D is another half step. D to D sharp, another half step. D sharp to E, another half step. E to F, another half step. 5 half steps does not the Diablos in music make. It requires 6 F to F sharp.
Ah.
So it's C to a kind of F, in this case an F sharp. That is the augmented fourth. If you reverse it, the higher C to a lower F sharp, that's a diminished fifth.
Ah. Interesting.
But, so, I think I got that right. Let's say that I did. Anyway, but C to F sharp, that pitch is unaccounted for. It's hard to account for it in classic Western harmony. And so the rule was, by the time Bach came around in the mid 18th century, no, 17th, excuse me. By the time he came around, they could not have both of those tones happening at the same time, striking at the same time, because it was too disruptive. That particular interval requires a move. You can't just let it stay there. And like Michael suggested, there was something about that interval that they suspected was demonic, because it wasn't really accounted for in the system of harmony that was developed. So if you let's say that never mind, I'd have to spell out too much. It'd be easier to play it. But you could say have an F sharp, and I know I'm going to have to involve C at some point. So I might start from D. And while that F sharp is holding, I've got F sharp, D playing at the same time, and then slide in the C right there for a moment before resolving the chord to a G and a B in this case. So I've got to let that, it has to be approached in passing, not directly. They were so afraid of it, but it's a necessary interval. It's absolutely necessary. It is the most profound change, other than what I would call the half step. If you have a C and a C sharp together, it's grating. But this doesn't grate; it seduces you. We actually feel okay with it, just a little disturbed. It's not like a punch in the eye, a punch in the nose. I'm trying to find better. Is this making sense at all?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a wonderful interval. Now, one thing I was before we got started, we've got a piano here in the lodge, hanging out in one of the hallways, and I just started thinking about the diminished fourth or diminished fifth, and I thought, wait a minute, let's go play around with halftones. And so I went to the piano and had not done this before, but if you count up by threes, you will end up with the chord of a diminished seventh, which involves not one, but two. No. Yeah. E to E flat to A. Yeah, not one, but two diminished fifths. Stacked right all together. And it's the juiciest chord. It's a ba da 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 da. I can play it anyway. It's the juiciest little chord, and but it requires a change. It's just that the change can come from any place. So, quick concept: consonance and dissonance. In music, consonance is a combination of two or more tones that are fine, just resting where they are. Dissonance is the idea of two tones that really want to move. Something wants to change in them. The diminished seventh chord is it sort of can rest on its own, but it doesn't ever really want to. It wants to change. So you can change it, but because it contains two of these diablos and musicas, it can go a number of different directions. It's a wonderful, wonderful chord. But you hear it all the time. You hear it all the time now in.
So it's not really demonic anymore.
No, not anymore. But it still sounds it. It's like I was saying in metal or that's it. That's what's his name? Marilyn Manson.
Right.
That's the diminished seventh. Diminished
that does
fifth.
sound cool.
Yeah, it is cool. I love it.
It's interesting. I remember, I don't know where I heard this when I was young, but Debussy broke some rules. I remember reading about this. He broke some harmonic rules during the time, and his teachers thought he was scandalous, and I thought nobody would think him as scandalous now.
Not anymore, but no.
But at the time, he was doing things differently.
Yeah, actually, Debussy involved chords like your beautiful diminished seventh or diminished seventh chord. He used them prodigiously. These, when you listen to Claude Debussy's music today, I think a lot of people would think of it as romantic, but at the time, this is coming at the end of what's called the Romantic period, which where music began to take on more collect in our consciousness. Music became more than just music. Music was also narrative. It was also story. I mean, we'd had opera, obviously, for a couple hundred years before, but the difference is that composers were not feeling obliged to stick to specific forms. If you hear a Mozart symphony and compare that with, say, Shostakovich, you can clearly hear the form, the adherence to form in Mozart. Shostakovich, you're not nearly as clear about that. And so that's an era later. Between Romanticism and the more modern era of which Shostakovich was a member, there was a small window, late 19th century, early 20th century, where composers were referred to as impressionists. Similar to the Impressionist movement in art, where you would have a dollop here, bip, 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 smaller things to represent a larger whole. So some of what he did wrong, and just let's be clear in this: every composer worth anything breaks rules. They can be small rules, small practices. Break with a small practice that composers before me had, and I'm going to start a new school. So every composer breaks something. You learn all the rules so that you can break them intelligently.
Right.
But his use of harmony was different, very different. So as opposed to the here's a good one. Bum dum 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 bum 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 dum 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 ding ding da do da do da do da dum. People don't know, but that particular opening is describes perfect 1-5 pattern, or tonic to the dominant pattern. Ba do da da da, ba da da do da do da do do. There's your 5 with a dominant seventh on the top of it. Debussy was not as interested in that kind of a setup. That's a classic, perfect progression, 1 to 5, or tonic to dominant, and subdominant, that type of thing. Debussy was not as interested in that. What brought you? I'm curious, what got you interested in Debussy?
I had to go look it up because I don't know I played classical piano and I must have been playing a piece and maybe my teacher told me, because I did take a few music classes at NYU. Somewhere it's stuck in my brain because I remember thinking like, how odd that he was scandalous, because his beautiful music and it just stuck in my head all these years. And so I went and I looked it up and I said, yeah, it's really true. I didn't just make that up in my head. And I think I must have been playing or it must have been for my NYU class in music, or that the teacher mentioned it, and I would have never known on my own. So unfortunately, oh my gosh, we're
I'm hearing music.
winding down.
We're done?
So Yes, and well, let's see, where can we reach you? It's Ray Davis,
Ray Davis Music at raydavismusic.com.
and also on Instagram, it's official Ray Davis
official Ray
Music.
Davis.
You can
Yeah.
follow him there, and you're on Facebook. And
Yeah.
please check out his website. He's got some short pieces of his music you can listen to, and you can really get a chance to know his own writing and singing. And I think he's amazing. And we're so happy to have you here today, and hope you enjoyed it, and you'll come back
Great time.
maybe.
Yeah, I would love to.
So.
Lots of stuff to talk about.
So, well, thank you all for listening, and we will see you, I'll see you next week as we continue to explore the esoteric and obscure together. Have a great week.